Are you ready to uncover the secret architects of your thriving garden? In last week's video, we looked at the soil food web and the amazing impact that it has on building healthy soil structure. So today we are going to be taking a look at one particular type of creature that plays a part in the structure of your garden. And so we are going to dig deep into these creatures. Now these creatures fall into three categories and we're going to be discussing each of them. Hi, I'm White Davy. So today we are going to be looking at these creatures that have been around for millenniums, and they have been gaining a lot of attention globally in recent times because more and more people are becoming aware of the value that they had when they're in your soil. Are you ready to find out what creatures these are and what benefits they bring to your garden? Can you guess what creatures they are? Did I just hear you say worms? You got that right. We are going to be talking about worms. Now the three categories of worms, let's look at them and the role that each of them play in your garden. First, we are going to be starting with the epigetic worms. Now these worms are the most popular of all worms because we raise them for our garden in our compost bins, and they can be found readily in our garden in most cases. So, what are epigetic worms? What benefits do they bring to the garden? Well, epigetic worms are worms that dwell on the surface of your soil in the organic matter that is on your soil. They live in and feed on these organic matter, breaking them down into rich nutrients that your soil and your plants can benefit from. Next, we have the endogetic worms. Now these worms we also use as composting worms, and they can be found in the soil level. So these worms don't go very deep into the soil, into the ground, but they live in the soil, and these worms create tunnels as they burrow through the soil in search of food and in search of protection from predators. Now these guys, as they travel through the soil, creating tunnels, allowing airflow and allowing moisture to drain and for the soil to retain moisture, they also go to the surface and they take these organic matter and they spread it out in the soil, and as they go, they are dropping their castings as well. Now as we go through the three types of worm, we're going to be going back a little bit and discussing more about these worms. So next up, we have the anexic worms. Now these worms are not composting worms. If you put them in organic matter to raise them, they will die. They need to be able to burrow down deep below the soil level into the ground, and they go many feet down into the ground. Now these worms create even more tunnel, and as they tunnel through the soil, through the ground, they are taking organic matter from the surface deep down into the soil. So for your plants that have deep roots that are going below the soil level down into the ground, these worms are taking the nutrients deep down for those roots to have access to. Now, what is so important about these worms, apart from them just creating tunnel that allow airflow and allow moisture drainage and retention? Well, what is so unique about these guys is their castings. Now, as these guys drop their castings, guess what is in their castings? Did you see last week's video and the video before that? Yes, we talk about how plants are in charge of life on earth. I'm not talking about the creator, we know he is in charge, but outside of the creator, plants play a very intricate role in our survival. Not only for humans, but for every life form on this planet. And we discussed that in the video that we did 2 weeks ago. And last week we looked at the soil food web and the benefit that it has on your soil structure. Now, among the soil food webs are microbes, those we discussed in last week's video. Guess what the microbes contain? All sorts of organisms. Bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, you name it, they are there in your castings. Yes, that is what makes worm casting so important, because the worm castings with the bacteria and the fungi feeding on the exudates from the plants, and with the protozoa and the nematode feeding on the bacteria and fungi, and then with other organisms feeding on those nematodes and protozoa, the soil food web continues. Now the worm castings is what is going to provide that initial boost of microorganisms that plays their part in the health of your soil. Now you need to go back and watch those 2 videos, so I'm going to be leaving a link below so that you can see those 2 videos to get more details, so you can get a richer understanding of the benefit of both the plants and the soil food web in creating a thriving, healthy, beautiful, vibrant garden. So we talked about how these microorganisms, especially the bacteria and the fungi, are able to bond the soil particles together to build the soil, to make it stronger so that it doesn't get easily eroded by water, and so that you can have a nice, rich, healthy soil. So if you want to see more, if you want to understand more about this, I suggest you go and click on those 2 links below so that you can get the full benefit from this video. Now let's go back and look at these worms. We talk about the 3 categories of worms, right? So we're going to be focusing on the 2 first one that we mentioned, the epigeek worms and the endogeek worms. Now both of these worms are composting worms. The epigeek that dwells on the surface of the soil, they live in organic matter and they feed on the organic matter, breaking it down into rich nutrients, as we mentioned before. Now these worms include things like red wrigglers and the Indiana blue worms. Now these are epigeek worms because they only dwell in the organic matter. As for the endogeek worms, these worms that we also use for composting are worms that are night crawlers. So your African night crawlers, your Canadian night crawlers, your European night crawlers, these are endogeek worms. So you have the option to choose which of these you want to raise. You can raise all the various types of composting worms, whether you're going to keep each type in separate containers or you're going to keep them all together. It doesn't really matter. If you're doing it for commercial purposes, then you may want to keep them separately. But if you are raising them just for your garden and for your friends, then if you want to have a combination of worms, you can do so. And the benefit of having more than one type of worm is that each type of worm prefers different climatic condition and different condition in the worm bin. And because of that, say for example, when it is winter, then you will find that your red wrigglers and your European night crawlers and your Canadian night crawlers will thrive. And when it is summer, then you might find that your Indiana blue and your African night crawlers are thriving more than the others. So it is beneficial to have a mix of them if you so desire. It is not required, but it does has its benefits. So guys, if you want to learn more about these composting worms, then join me for next week's video where we'll be sharing more practical information that can help you to have that beautiful paradise garden. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have yourself a wonderful day. Yeah man, a time for growth.